We're happy to be here with you this morning. We both live in Boulder County where the fire occurred, so we're going to give you a little overview of the history and how we worked through the process and kind of have an extraordinary rate of rebuilding right now, even just a little under 2 years after the fire.
So on December 30th, 2021, fueled by dry conditions and 100-mile-an-hour-per-hour winds, the Marshall Fire was the most destructive fire in Colorado history. More than 100 homes were lost and more than 6,000 acres burned. Unlike many of the fires in the West, this was not a forest fire. This started as a grassland fire and quickly moved into urban areas and became an urban fire. This was a climate change fueled disaster. It's often said that global warming is more accurately described as global weirding, and such was the case this year in 2021. An unusually wet spring was followed by the second driest half of a year in Colorado history, and also the latest snow on record in the plains in Boulder County. And the day after the fire, it finally snowed.
So you can see from, next slide. We're coordinating ourselves. So Boulder County has been in a state of continuous disaster recovery since 2013, which was a massive, I think it was a 100-year flood. Yeah. Four of the top 5 largest wildfires have occurred between 2018 and 2021. So this was the largest fire in Colorado history and most destructive, not the largest by size, but by destruction of homes and commercial properties. So we had an interesting situation unfolding. These were the codes before the fire. So Boulder County, above 2021 IECC, they called them Build Smart codes. That was passed in 2016. The city of Louisville, in October, now keep in mind the fire was just a couple of months later. So in October, they actually passed the most progressive codes in the state, energy codes, and it was the IECC plus what they call the RX Appendix, which was solar requirements, things of that nature. And the town of Superior, literally the week after the fire, was supposed to discuss passing the new 2021 IECC codes. So, this is Zach.
So that's the background. So then the fire happens, and where do you start as someone who wants to help homeowners get back into homes that are high performance, more comfortable, healthier? First, don't reinvent the wheel. Call all your friends, make new friends, talk to a lot of people. Unfortunately, there are many communities across the U.S. that have been through this already. And we learned a lot from the Advanced Energy Rebuild effort after the Tubbs fire in Sonoma County, both from a report they published and talking to folks who were involved in that effort. The California Assembly Bill 513 became a model for a bill that was ultimately passed here in Colorado. And then another thing that I can't recommend enough is keep talking to all your friends, quickly develop communication channels. There's a lot of information that needs to be shared and sorted out to begin to put together some supportive services. So for our portion of the rebuilding effort, we're not permitting officials, we're a group of people from sustainability offices and the state offices and nonprofits and volunteers who got together and said, we want to help people get back into healthier, more comfortable, and more climate-friendly homes that do less to contribute to climate change, which exacerbated the conditions of the fire in the first place. And so this screenshot here summarizes our goal. It's also the first chapter of a custom-built website that we put together specifically to support the rebuild effort.
So this is a great overview of our partners. Obviously, Xcel Energy, got the State Energy Office, Colorado Green Building Guild, we love you. Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, RMI, and obviously the jurisdictions that were impacted. So we worked really quickly together to pull what's our next steps? And you'll see, we'll talk a lot about these different organizations as we move through the presentation. So we literally, it was very quickly, so the fire was December 30th. And by January 14th, we were hosting these very large stakeholder engagement meetings with all the jurisdictions impacted, with state, local, county folks, Green Building Guild, a lot of the folks, Excel Energy. But this is just what we were talking about that very day. This was our first meeting. And you can see right here, defining narrative response to Louisville net zero code, sustainable building costs, because already, as you'll see in coming slides, there was a huge controversy about cost and a lot of false narratives out there. And so that was kind of our first big trial. Yep.
So immediately after the fire, thousands of people lost their home. There's massive trauma. There's massive underinsurance. People had lost everything that they owned and their home, and then found out that they were underinsured to the tune of $200,000 to $400,000. So this is sort of the backdrop. If you weren't there, you didn't experience it. Just a lot of grief and a lot of processing and a lot of anger and frustration over the fire, over the underinsurance, over having lost everything. And add to that the recent building code adoption and some misinformation to fan the flames of, concern about being able to rebuild, and things kind of got out of hand quickly.
So there was about a week we didn't have a press person at the state energy office when this all unfolded, so I was behind the scenes calling all of our major news channels and the newspaper. Essentially what happened is builders were being told by the Home Builders Association it was going to cost over $100,000 to build a 2021 IECC as opposed to 2018. So that started a thing, because then all of a sudden all the contractors that families were calling, they want to get their homes rebuilt, and they're saying, oh, well, if you have to build to those new codes, it's going to cost you over $100,000. Now imagine you've just been told your house is underinsured by hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the conflation between the underinsurance and this false narrative around building to the 2020 IECC was hugely problematic. And it made it into the newspapers, and this is really funny, this is the press, right? A family said a builder told them it would cost around $100,000 to meet these standards. A state office, not which state office or where the information came from, which is a peer-reviewed study by PNNL, the cost is a little over $5,000. That is how that differential between 2018 and 2021. So it was like really hard to fight this battle. Is this me? Oh yeah. So basically what ended up happening, people that I know, because again, this is our community, right? I live in Lafayette and Zach lives in Boulder, and the fires happened between us essentially. Some people we know really well started to stage rallies and protest against the building codes. Again, one of the most progressive counties in the country. Let's parse this out a little bit. So as you can see, building experts, so the city of Louisville hired a consultant to do a little research, and they came out with around 20,000. Still not very accurate, but way less than 100,000. And really a rounding error when you're building your, $800,000 home or $1 million home. So this quote, "Are you saying the policy of net zero matters more than people?" So what happened in Louisville is the city council members, even though they're, champions of climate policy, they really had some challenges when you have people who've lost everything and have been really traumatized coming to city council meetings and saying, "You're not listening to me. I don't matter." So he's now a state rep actually, Kyle Brown, this is paraphrasing, but what he sort of said at one of the meetings where they decided to roll back the codes, "When I look at the data, it's clear we should keep the 2021 code. However, the public narrative has gotten so out of hand, for the sake of my neighbors, I have to vote to repeal it." It was repealed by one vote, essentially, the majority vote. So that was really hard for us, because we knew how incredibly important it is for folks to build really good energy efficient homes, that it is obviously more cost effective, it's better for the environment, but also that they now they had a choice, right? They could both Superior did end up passing the 2021 code as well, but both cities decided that they would have a rollback for anyone who had lost their home. So they could build to the previous code, which was 2018. So, yep, rolled back the codes. And this whole time, Boulder County's like, hey, we've had even a higher code since 2016, and nobody's complaining about that. But, you know, different scenario that had been passed in 2016, but no one complained about it, right? So that's sort of where we left it, and we got to figure out some things from there.
So I think the difference in what happened in each of the three communities, and that in unincorporated Boulder County, they had a code that again was stronger than the 2021 IECC ever since 2016, sort of speaks to the conflagration of people wanting to get back into their homes. Again, experience this traumatic event, this loss, a lot of anger, a lot of confusion. No idea where to start. How do you begin the process? And just the focus on the codes really became an issue in Louisville and Superior, but then, just right next door, not at all in unincorporated Boulder County. So I think it just speaks to that moment in time and some of the misinformation that was out there around green building. And, I don't want a green build. I just want my home back was some of the sentiment.
So this is pretty exciting. So our stakeholder group had been meeting for about a year and a half, probably, when this all came out. You'll see in some of our slides, Excel became a huge partner in creating a really robust rebate program. The state stepped in and passed legislation that also allowed for additional incentives for building all electric. So the Green Building Guild, Boulder County, tons of information. The website that Zach was mentioning, rebuildingbetter.org, write it down, because it is a huge kind of portfolio of information just for building a house. It doesn't necessarily mean you lost your home in a disaster, but the amount of resources compiled in there is pretty astonishing. At passive home, all electric, all the different things, and the rebates that Excel created. There's tiered rebates from $7,500 for IECC 2021 all the way up to $37,500 for passive. My point in saying all of that is the level of education and outreach and support. Robbie, who's here, he's going to be running around with the microphone. He's our tech guy. So he's been hosting open office hours. Any homeowner or builder who has questions can talk to Robbie about all this stuff. The amount of education and movement forward on this has been extraordinary. So here we have the same resident from Louisville saying to ask people who've literally nothing to foot the bill for these environmental codes on top of everything else we're dealing with is just too much. She's one of the people who hosted a rally. Fast forward, post-education, incentives, just a lot of hard work from our stakeholder group. The headline, Marshall Fire victims protested green building codes is too expensive. Now majority are voluntarily adopting them, right? So her same resident quote is, why not do this? It's good for the planet. Same person. So we worked really, really hard to get there. And yeah, it took time and money and legislation and a huge investment from Excel. We think that the Excel rebate program will pay out around $5 million total for rebates. Oh, it's me too. So this is going back a little bit to the misinformation. This is the Home Builders Association HBA letter to the city of Louisville. This was in February of 2022. Cost estimates for 2021 IECC range up to $180,000 or more. We asked them several times for their source, like, give us some stats, give us some data. Never happened. And then all of a sudden, September of 2022, Erie was looking to adopt the new codes. HBA sends a letter. Oh, changed pretty dramatically. 2021 IECC cost comparison study indicated a cost increase between $8,000 and $11,000. They must have some data to support that this time. So that's just kind of the wild stuff that we were working through. And I will say, Home Builders Association created a task force. They provided a lot of resources and education. and events. So I'll put that addendum in there.
Yeah, the Home Builders Association definitely was very helpful in helping folks find builders and begin to sort out the process of rebuilding a home. Just on this particular point, not very helpful. So what about the actual outcomes in terms of rebuilding? So on the left side here, you see the rebuilding rates, or the participation rates in the advanced energy rebuild after the Tubbs fire in Sonoma County. And about 6% of homeowners participated in that program. On the right, we have the Marshall Fire Rebuilding Better effort. And between the 48% of permitted homes that have registered with our effort and the 22% that we know are eligible but have not yet registered, we're on track to have a 70% participation rate in building beyond the 2018 codes.
I numbers.
So obviously that's over 10 times the achievement of the advanced energy rebuild, and we really, credit much of our success to the lessons we learned from that and other rebuilding efforts. Without having learned from past disaster and recovery efforts, we would not have been able to achieve this. So breaking it down a little bit further, we have about a third of homeowners have chosen to build to 2018 IECC. 18% are building to 2021. Another 22% are building to at least 2021 or above. So this is a category where we know from permit data they're meeting 2021 IECC, but they haven't yet registered with our program, so we don't know if they're going beyond that. We have 5% that are building to Energy Star version 3.2, excuse me. 8% that are building to Department of Energy Zero Energy Ready Homes version 2. 11% that are building to Energy Star Next Gen, and we believe we are the first community to start using that program. And Next Gen is the all-electric Energy Star program. And then we have one registered FIAS house and 6 registered PHI houses. So what moved the needle? How did we get from protesting the 2021 building codes to building passive houses? Really, the answer is money, which Christine is going to talk to in a second here. So I'll just gloss over, Xcel Energy came up with what we believe are the largest incentives for any disaster recovery, for high performance rebuilding and any disaster recovery. The state passed Senate Bill 22206, Disaster Preparedness and Recovery, which gave the Colorado Energy Office $20 million to help support energy efficient recovery after disasters across the state. And then there's a whole host of other things that help too. We had a concerted media campaign around education, around not only the codes, but also just the benefits of a high performance home. What is the difference between a green home, which is good for the environment, and a high performance home, which is good for you? They're the same home. Colorado Green Building Guild helped us out with a lot of webinars and in-person events to help educate homeowners and decide what was important to them. Most of us don't have the opportunity, I would say, to build our own home, and these homeowners were forced into that choice, of not of their choosing. And so what do they prioritize? What are their values there? All of a sudden they had to figure this out. Trainings for contractors and builders. We have the Energy Smart. Energy Smart is the local residential energy advising service run by Boulder County. We hired Robbie Schwartz, who's going to be going around with a microphone as our new homes advisor. Robbie is a HERS rater and certified passive house consultant, and was instrumental in helping folks understand, both homeowners and builders understand these certifications. And then, as mentioned, we created this website, rebuildingbetter.org.
So this is the portfolio of incentives. We've got the Xcel rebates in the first column. They kind of jumped right in, and what the beauty of the Xcel rebates is that is a direct, communication line to the customer, the impacted homeowners. So they were able to communicate with them, and they provided a ton of trainings for contractors and builders on these energy codes, which are brand new, like the Next Gen one, just hot off the press from the EPA. So they really have the resources, because they're a large utility, to kind of build all of the additive information and resources. One thing I wanted to make note of is that many of these homeowners have, in their own way, had to become green home experts by default. There was a lot of resistance from some builders to build to these different energy codes. And so the homeowner really had to advocate, which is exhausting, and self-selected into some of the webinars and really learned a lot, and we're pushing the builders. I want to go all electric. No, you have to have natural gas. No, I don't want natural gas, right? No, heat pumps don't work in Colorado, like all the things that we hear that are infuriating. So the homeowners really stood strong, and you saw the numbers. But here are the incentives, right? So straight off the bat, you build to 2021, you get $7,500 rebate. And because it's through a utility, it's not taxable. And then all the way up, you'll see to the passive house rebate. The state passed legislation in and amongst all of this, really identifying the fact that in these major disasters, when we have the loss of, in this case, over 1,000 homes, there needs to be huge support to rebuilding high efficiency homes. We passed $20 million worth of legislation, another $15 million for the Department of Local Affairs to help in the rebuilding process with forgivable loans and grants. So pretty comprehensive. And we sort of stepped in and said, okay, well, we're just going to add some more money in. We're going to do $10K for all electric. We're going to do an additional $20K for all electric combo geothermal. So if you do the math, you do passive house, maybe you have geothermal. I mean, the numbers get pretty big. And we have definitely heard feedback from folks that like the rebates matter to them. They had to cut costs on so many things because of the underinsurance, that getting these incentives really made a difference and changed their path on how they were going to rebuild their home.
And during when the protests were happening over the energy codes, much of the sentiment was, and we were working towards this. We couldn't announce that these were coming yet, but we said, we will have incentives, we will have support, and much of the sentiment of the community was, okay, but you don't now, and you can't promise it. So give us the option, and if you give us the option, we'll do it. And as you saw, we did, and they did. So that is a good story there. Definitely, again, it was the financial incentives that I think were kind of the center point of all of this. I don't think a website alone would have yielded these outcomes. But it also wasn't a website alone. It was, all of those organizations that we had on the slide earlier working together, meeting. We had subcommittees meeting multiple times a week. We are still meeting now, tomorrow, actually. And we tried to break down the complex process of building a home and the decision-making processes into a series of steps, healthy home, resilient home, what are the rebates, incentives, finding your building team, materials and equipment. And we had a lot of support from folks, again, like the Colorado Green Building Guild, and we host a lot of their webinars on our website, as well as Alpine High Performance Products, who are one of the vendors who came through with discounts on their products and services. And you'll hear a little bit more from Brad soon. So what are the lessons learned? First, on the subject of the codes, the narrative can get away from you quickly. As Christine showed, we had our first meeting 2 weeks after the fire, and the narrative had already, on the code had already gotten away from us. Perception can quickly become the reality. And we, again, much of what was going on in that moment was a processing of a lot of trauma, and compounded by the underinsurance trauma. And folks were looking for actions that they could take that would make, getting back into a home easier for them. And so that was part of what was going on in that moment. And that is a very, very powerful force. And, in that background, no building official, no state official is ever going to be more credible than one voice that speaks to your greatest fear, that, this is farther away than you think it is. And we also saw that the Green Building Guild, the Colorado Green Building Guild, who are all volunteers volunteering their time to help educate homeowners, they were dismissed as out of touch. And passive house in general, people were like, I don't want to talk about passive house. That's not for me. That's not achievable. I don't want to even hear about it. Why are you wasting my time with it? When in reality, the folks at the Colorado Green Building Guild and what we were doing as well, we're just talking about good building science principles. How do you end up in a better home? We're not saying everybody needed to go passive house. Clearly, not everybody has, but some have chosen to do that. So beyond the codes, more broadly, we also learned that the best time to prepare for disaster recovery, of course, is before the disaster happens. There is simply not time to train builders, the public, on everything they need to know after the disaster, right? Like there's not time, between the disaster and now to learn how to build passive houses and then also support people who run out of cost of living insurance coverage within 24 months after the disaster. As I said earlier, don't reinvent the wheel. Lots of folks have been through this before. We've been through this now. We're happy to share. We only were able to do what we did and achieve what we did because we built on lessons learned from others. Partner with your utility. Again, as far as we know, Xcel Energy came through with the highest incentives for recovery after a disaster of any utility, and the highest passive house incentives of any utility, period, in any instance. Feel free to come up and correct me if I'm wrong on that. But leveraging trusted sources of information is critical, and very quickly you can, if you, speaking as a local government person, can not become, I think of local government as a trusted source of information. Very quickly, we were not a trusted source of information. And so we learned that working through local neighborhood groups, local Slack channels, much of the work that Robbie did was vital. And then using new certification requires lots of training and continued training. So we're proud that this effort pushed the boundaries of home performance buildings. So of the incentives that Christine listed earlier, Energy Star version 3.2 had just been finalized. Zero Energy Ready version homes version 2 had just been finalized. At the time that we launched the incentives, the Energy Star Next Gen program didn't even have a name. So it had not even yet been finalized. And so all of those things required and still require training for builders, for HERS raters, and for homeowners to understand what does it take to build to these things. And so we're proud to have pushed the envelope there, but we may have, in the beginning, underestimated the amount of training that was necessary to be able to accomplish that. And then this will not be a surprise to anybody in the room. Building teams don't talk to each other enough. And homeowners had to become their own building science advocates, which on top of everything else, they've lost everything, they're underinsured, they now have this full-time job in addition to their full-time job of rebuilding a home, and they need to, because their building teams aren't talking, they need to become their own advocates. So all of that is a lot. So how did business as usual change for us personally? Well, I'm a commercial sustainability guy. I took on residential services the day after the fire. That was planned several months in advance. We hired our first Energy Smart advisor the day of the fire. She drove through the fire on her first day to work. So big change for me personally. It also opened my eyes to the negative perceptions of green building as not for me and just being for the environment, and so much so that we quickly erased the term green building from our lexicon and switched to talking about high performance building. High performance being something that's much more desirable, and we talked about just the benefits to the homeowner. So on our website, Rebuilding Better, we have very little about the benefits to the climate, but what are the benefits to the homeowner? And then finally, on a positive note, it raised my expectations of what's possible. You know, when I was reading the report from the Advanced Energy Rebuild from the Tubbs fire, and they had 6% participation, I thought, gosh, like if we could double that, if we get into the double digits, I think that'd be pretty good. And there was a part of me that's like, well, really, we need like 10x that, but like we're never going to be able to achieve that. And now we're in a position where we've surpassed that. And so that has been sort of transformative for me in terms of raising my expectations of what we can achieve.
And you'll see in my comments there that with that $20 million of legislation, in addition, we created an Office of Climate Preparedness and Disaster Recovery for the state of Colorado. So really understanding that local governments can't go alone, do this alone. I mean, all these natural disasters hit, and it's the local electeds and staff that have to take on a huge amount of responsibility. And they're already, you know, they already have capacity issues. So when can the state step in and prepare for these things in advance and prepare communities? So yeah, and it's our backyards. You know, the story for me is I have a couple of kids and I had to tell them to pack bags. I saw 4 fires out my window and it gets really real. And again, over 1,000 homes, that's 1,000 families with kids or older adults or people who were retired. Many people were out of town because it was right around New Year's Eve. So we're grateful it was during the day. There was very little loss of life. 2 people passed away, but this was an extraordinary, transformative event for our community. And to be able to learn from this and share this information with you is really amazing because it's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen, and acknowledging that, how do we best prepare our communities and residents? So please, again, Rebuilding Better, amazing website. Please take a look at it. Zach did an incredible job getting that pulled together.
So our final 2 slides are slides of thanks. First, you know, we achieved what we did because we leveraged the knowledge of others, and much of the building science education and principles and talking points came from passive house professionals, and that's really what we based our effort around, and we also want to pay that forward. So we are happy to be open books to anyone who is rebuilding after a disaster. We built the website with the intention that hopefully it will be copied. And we encourage people to flagrantly take content from that website, or we can, you know, talk with you and our web developer and just give you the code and you can make it your own. And then lastly, you know, we did a lot of work to create the conditions to make it easier to make the choice to build a high performance home, but ultimately it was the homeowners that made that choice. And so, you know, while I think we can claim some credit for helping to make that happen, really at the end of the day, this was homeowners who have gone through the most traumatic experience of their lives and have chosen, despite the underinsurance and despite the concerns around cost, to say, you know what, this is important to me, and we're going to do this. And so, you know, I don't want you to have the impression that we're claiming credit for this. It is the homeowners who get credit for these outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach and Christine. It's been interesting being part of this group and seeing these 2 work and direct us all and bring us all together. But I do want to reiterate that Passive House in this situation was something nobody knew about. And now there's this incredible amount of awareness, and it's not something that everybody was able to achieve. And there's a lot of reasons for that we can talk about. But it was the pathway, it was the structure for which we talked about air quality and air tightness and fire resilience and comfort. And so thank you to the Passive House community for that. I want to introduce Brad, the CEO of Alpine High Performance Products, who's our next speaker.
Thank you. Great job. I'm going to talk about a couple of things quickly, but I'm going to start with the experience of a manufacturer right in the heart of the Marshall Fire. I want to how many people here are not from Colorado, if you don't mind? And could you tell me how many people are from and around Boulder County here? Okay, so a little more than half, I would say, or 3/4 are not from here. When you go home and you watch the news every day, it's almost impossible not to be watching scenes of some disaster somewhere, isn't it? It's remarkable. If you can go to the next slide, or I can forward them here, I guess. 2 seconds on Alpen. We are a high performance window manufacturer. We're located in Louisville, Colorado. We moved into our new facility in Louisville right as the pandemic started. We have 142 employees, last time I counted. And we're very, very proud to be closely associated with the Passive House community. We were the first U.S. manufacturer to offer Passive House data to the Passive House community, and we have been very passionate about serving the needs of the Passive House community, and I'll share with you some lessons learned. And we're proud to be the first North American manufacturer to be offer PHI and FIAS products. But this is our Marshall Fire story. A day like any other day. Everybody was excited. We got to go home for a long weekend the next day. This was the last working day of the year. And there was a palpable excitement. We had our sales meeting a day early, and we were teasing our remote salespeople in Florida and Arizona about how wonderful the weather was in Colorado. No snow. They both had lived in Colorado and spent a lot of time making fun of us during snowstorms. At 11:47, I had a young man open the door to my office. I was on a call, just hanging up, and he said, "Do you smell smoke?" And I stopped and I said, yeah, I do. That's weird. I got up. There were a number of people starting to mill about the office. And I got in my car and drove up to the top of a hill right behind us because there was certainly smoke. Timeline. This 11:47, this was, do you smell smoke? About 45 minutes earlier, you see where the fire, sorry? Sure. But can you hear me? About 45 minutes earlier, you saw where the fire started, about 4 miles as the crow flies away from our facility. I point out the Costco facility here and the Alpen facility located across the highway. It's about a 5-minute drive, but very, very close as a practical matter. I don't know if you can get any of the sound on that. This is at 12:10 p.m. This is what was going on 2,000 feet away. This is 20 minutes after Do You Smell Smoke? These are families desperately trying to get out of Costco. This is how fast things are happening. This is what was going on across the street at that exact same time. It was clear something was going on. If you walked outside, it was ferocious winds, hard to imagine, which is not unusual in Colorado. We thought something strange was going on, so what do? We didn't know what to do. We called 911, said no problems, no, the fire's on the west side of the Highway 36, we're on the east side, no evacuation necessary. I remember we sat, we got together in groups, we said, well, this doesn't seem right. If people wanted to go home, we said, your call, go home. We were not sort of mandating the home, we just called 911. But things were getting bad quickly. 12:10, that's the exact same time you just saw the Costco scene. That's what it looked like outside of our facility, only 2,000 feet away. We placed our second call to 911. Strangely, the fire is still contained on the west side of Highway 36. No need to evacuate. We got back together and said, boy, this just doesn't seem right. So we issued a mandatory evacuation. We started walking through the facility. Luckily, many of our employees were out at lunch. We systematically had people call them and tell them not to come back. And we started trying to evacuate a facility full of employees. Better safe than sorry. We made that call. I'm glad we did. What was interesting was, although we told everybody to go home and what was going on, we saw employees not believing us, kind of going back to their work areas. We took a second trip through the warehouse and had people sitting on work stools near their workstations, looking on their phones. We said, please, it's time to evacuate. This is 12:30. I walked back to the front of the office and Amanda was outside the front door screaming, the fire is on the other side of the parking lot, only a few 100 feet away from our front door, which shocked all of us. We knew it was bad. We didn't know it was already there. So we went back through the warehouse and asked our employees to leave and leave now. 12:33, third trip. This guy didn't believe anything. He was sitting back there until I yelled at him, get out so I can leave. It's our last employee, 12:36. And I finally made one last trip through and nobody else was there and jumped in my car. This is right after that gentleman left. My last trip through a couple minutes later, this is what it looked like outside of our facility. Seemed surreal, really, really strange. I was shaken by Amanda screaming the fire is across the parking lot. And I was the last one to leave. As I usually do, I went out on Centennial Parkway, started driving toward McCaslin, said, whoa, holy crap. Fire is on outside of our parking lot. It's on both sides of the road. What's going on? Why are all these cars stopped? Why aren't they leaving? There's fire right next to them. I was concentrating on what was going on to the side. I looked in front of me. I see why they're not going, because they can't see what's in front of them. So I banged a U and left. I made the turn to go the other way. One of the plant supervisors right in front of me, couple of minutes, went down McCaslin, and he said flames were leaping over his car as he tried to go the way I was going there. This is 55 minutes after Do You Smell Smoke? We all went home. We all made it home safely, and we were amazed. I stopped on top of a hill, and I looked at what was going on. I was absolutely shocked at what was going on in our immediate neighborhood. Throughout the rest of that day into the night, our employees were obviously equally shaken. What occurred to me was they were concerned about safety. They were concerned about, did everybody make it out okay? And many of them were concerned if they had just lost their jobs. I got this text. Everybody wants to know if our company burned down. So I don't know. The next morning, I got up and tried to weave my way back through police barricades. I felt a little guilty that I was trying to get back, but I had so many people that wanted to know if our company had burned down that I found that I was able to find a path. I was flabbergasted at what I saw. These are a couple of images I took. It was shocking to me. You would drive up on one part of Louisville and there'd be 10 burned homes completely surrounded by homes that were not burned. I got to our facility and drove around. There's multiple tenants in our building. This is the back of the building. You can see that the trailer caught on fire and it burned inside that one of our co-tenants' spaces. This space to the left had its windows burned out, but we were lucky. Of course, we had no power, no water, it smelled like smoke, but we were one of the lucky ones. That's all I could think after seeing what I saw. This shows you where Alpin is located. You can see the fire that started to the far left. There's a big hill behind us, and there's a big building. Clearly, the big hill behind us that I had driven up on to see what was going on is what split the fire there. We were lucky, very lucky to be not burned. The long road to recovery. This is Amanda screaming, "The fire is outside of our door." This is Amanda coming into work the following Tuesday to try to piece together how we were going to continue to operate. We didn't. We continued to operate. Our employees were remarkable. We had commitments to keep. We were very, very fortunate. But then we began just dealing with the trauma, knowing that you have survivor's guilt here. People around you had just lost everything, and you knew you were lucky. There was a sense of relief, but a sense of lots of emotions going through our employees. A lot of very, very emotional time after that, surprisingly emotional. Throughout the entire community, and certainly throughout our own workforce, these standard, normal feelings of shock, loss, fear. It first struck home with us when we fielded a phone call on Thursday of that week right after by a homeowner who had asked us to delay shipping his windows till after the Christmas holiday, that he said, I no longer need the windows, my house burned down. And we didn't care about getting paid for the windows. We were just shocked that it seemed so personal and so close to us. These are some of the many feelings, I think, that we experienced in our company, and certainly I think were some of the feelings that were felt elsewhere. Climate change deniers kind of took on a whole new level of frustration, because it was clear as Zach spoke, this was clearly a function of climate change, as is much of the disaster that we're seeing on the 5 o'clock news. There was a certain amount of anger and blame for who caused the fire. I think there's been, lots of lawsuits, lengthy investigations, and I think 2 different potential causes of the blaze. But it's an interesting phenomena. Everybody wants to find out who to blame. Yet, I think we saw some of the very best of people at the same time. It was an amazing community outreach. Everywhere, people desperately wanted to find ways to help and support those of our neighbors that lost everything. President Biden came out. But as the prior speaker said, these are some of the learnings that I want to share. It was shocking to me, and it was immediately apparent that most people who lost their fires were underinsured. Caused me to look at my own insurance policy, and I knew that I would have been one of them. But I think this is not unusual today. I think it's a bit of a scandal that we need to deal with. And this was a very interesting sort of emotional roller coaster for us. Of course, in the high performance world, we are big advocates of energy codes and the development of energy codes. But we immediately saw our neighbors protesting against the current energy codes and saying that they couldn't afford to pay the premiums for the energy codes that we all thought were fairly logical. And I think our own emotions were understanding the frustration, yet also being frustrated knowing that that's misinformation. It's not the reality. That's the world we're in. And I think it's informed and changed some of how the companies behaved. These are lessons learned in our response. It was overwhelming emotion for our company that this is our neighborhood. These are our people. We sell windows across North America, but this is our own backyard. And we desperately wanted to find ways to help as much as we could. Yet at many times we felt a little helpless, particularly early on. We knew very, very early that affordability was a very important part of high performance building. What we did is you see down at our booth, the Aspect window, it had been in development for a couple of years to bring to the high performance market a more affordable product. And we dramatically accelerated bringing it to market and all of the testing and certification work that needed to be done so that we could make it available specifically for the Marshall Fire community. As a matter of fact, we're going to name it the Marshall window line, but we thought that might have some negative connotations ultimately. And then at some point, there's not much you can do, despite the fact we know our products are affordable, accessible, but perceived as expensive, is to offer discounts. And we've offered systematic discounts to our neighbors in hundreds of thousands of dollars of real discounts. And it's intended to send a message that we want to do our part and help. But what's been fascinating to me, it's been an emotional journey for the whole company, I think, and all of us that love our company, we love our products, we love our neighbors, we love everything about what we do, is that we drove past for 6 months burned out homes. It took months before homes were systematically cleaned up. And it was a constant reminder of what happened. And then we began seeing building permits begin to be issued. And we had no illusions that we would sell everybody windows, et cetera, but we hoped we would be able to sell some. But it's been remarkably healing for our company and our people, and for me, to see homes with our windows. This is one of my favorite ironic photos. This is as I was fleeing Boulder the way as my car turned around. I drove past this church that had this fire in the background telling us to catch the fire. I think they had a different concept. This is the Marshall Fire rebuild area. This is my best attempt to put pins on the many homes that we're fortunate enough to be have our product in. We hope there are many more. But it's been a remarkably healing experience to drive past these homes and simply see your stickers and then meet homeowners. I don't know if Kevin Lombardo, if you're here, I had a chance to meet on Friday, who's building a beautiful passive house, sort of right up in that sort of snout of the monster there. Beautiful home. Just being around him, watching him tell his story. There's a piece on Colorado Public Radio that has a feature on Kevin and his home today. I urge you to look at. Made my day, made my week. And some of the reasoning and some of the thinking as he was telling us about his journey, he could have built a bigger home where he was rebuilding. But he knew it was obvious after polling his children and polling his family that they had to build back better. And I think exemplifies what we see as the general spirit in many of those rebuilding. These are a handful of images of homes that we're proud to have our product in. Once again, we celebrate this. We celebrate it not because we sold windows, we celebrate it because we feel like we're helping people build back better. I drive past this one intersection over and over and over. Every day I come in, every day I go home. It's a magnificent intersection of McCaslin and Via Pia, right in front of where Kevin's home is. And it had beautiful homes that overlooked this entire valley. And for me, it sort of exemplified the most emotionally disturbing, because I knew what homes were there and what that looked like. And it's just a very prominent intersection. I drove past it and I saw things like this. This is President Biden driving by that same ridge on his way to, after having addressed some of the victims, to go speak at the rec center around the corner. For me, seeing our windows on the 2 homes that are now being built on that exact same ridge, for some reason, provided me the closure that I personally needed. Important lessons. I think as the prior speakers talked about perception of passive house and high performance, this is not new for us. We understand this. We've been selling high performance products and windows for 15 years and high performance insulated glass units for 43 years. We understand this perception of green building, this perception of high performance, this perception of passive house causes some people to tune out. It's been very informative to us around product strategy, our own branding, et cetera. We're proud to sell products that are high performance and better than the average. We're proud to create great jobs for great people that are building these products. We're proud to be one of the only U.S. manufacturers really in this space. We're also very sensitive, because we see it all the time, of what we call the mainstream kind of bashing and kind of talking about particularly this tie of high performance and now passive house to being unaffordable, inaccessible, when in fact it's just not true. But it's an image problem, and it informs our own branding. The responsibility for high performance products is important. I think it is important to make it more accessible. As I chat with some of our fellow window manufacturers, we all have different strategies, and it helps inform me. Some are glad to be in the luxury markets and at prices that if you have to ask, you can't afford them, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And some are wanting high volume and lower pricing, and that's fine. That's great. What we look at Alpin is we really are interested in making higher performance products mainstream, successful, accessible, and affordable. And a lot of it is just a communication problem. We occasionally get to see bids from other window companies in the Marshall Fire area. It's not unusual. We don't solicit them, of course. And I just shake my head all the time and say, really? Affordable, accessible. But we have a responsibility to educate. We can't simply sit there and say, I can't believe people think that. It's our responsibility to educate about accessibility to these products. They are quickly becoming mainstream. It's shocking to me and very, very exciting and energizing to see how fast things are moving across the country right now. State codes are advancing much faster than is historically normal in places where they have the political cover to do so. And things like passive house are now in 19 states as part of a performance and prescriptive code, as are other green building systems, et cetera. So it's becoming mainstream. We have a responsibility to make sure they're successful and to make sure these products are accessible. So we still need to build high performance. We still need to build extremely high quality, but we need to continue to drive down the costs and make them accessible to as many people, because people want to build better. I think the western part of the United States, we uniquely sell across North America. I get to see what's going on across the country, and I'm a student of sort of politics and political traditions, et cetera. Colorado really exemplifies, I think, much of the West. And some would describe it as purple or whatever, but I think have this strong libertarian trend, and it always informed me when we saw people protesting against building codes, et cetera, and misinformation certainly. But we like out here in the West to not be told what to do. We'll do what we want. We'll do it right. And in fact, that's what's happening, I think. And that's what some of that protesting is. People afraid, underinsured, they don't have money, they're misinformation, et cetera. But don't tell me what to do. I'll do it anyway. And I think that's what the results are. And I think that's some of what I think we can understand. One last comment that I want to make here, and I think it's important to communicate. When we first started providing products and selling them into the passive house community, I remember, 2008, I think it was, we would every year say, how many passive house jobs did we do? In the first years, I think we counted at one point 16 or 17 states where we had been fortunate enough to supply our windows to the first passive house job. The next year it was, we did a lot of passive house jobs, but we did twice as many that were simply building to those standards, but weren't pursuing certification. And now we don't even ask anymore. It's unusual to have passive house incentives in the residential world where people now are incentivized, as Excel did here, and I think that's fantastic. But please be comfortable with the influence I think the passive house has had, that for every one residential job that is passive house certified, we probably sell 500 window sets into homes that are building to the general principles of building better. It is very, very broadly being adopted at much higher standards, I think, than one might think when they simply are counting passive house projects, et cetera. The same thing is happening in the commercial world because tax incentives are part of passive house rebuilding. We're doing tons and tons of commercial projects, and it's very exciting. I was at 5 big affordable housing passive house projects on the East Coast last week. And it's very, very exciting because this is affordable housing. This is people just simply building better because they can, and the state policy is incentivizing people to do. So it's be energized, because whatever you think the difference is you're making, I think it's much, much bigger than you personally probably realize as a practical matter. It's a very exciting time. How has it changed us? Profoundly. We have always believed in climate change, or most of us have. We now know that climate change is here. We can't stop it. How can we mandate it? I think it's informed us in some of our approach to what our mission is. We still are trying to have an oversized influence on climate change, energy efficiency, et cetera. Things like resilient design and passive survivability are now part of our lexicon and part of our product design strategy and part of our communication strategy, because people just are going to have to live in much more extreme climates. And I think we have to build better. We are laser focused on the combination of quality, because you cannot sacrifice quality in a high performance space where people are targeting you. We can always do better. And affordability. It's a very, very challenging but critical, we think, in a mission to kind of inform where we're trying to do. And we want to do everything we can to help this Build Back Better movement. We want to support it any way we can. It doesn't have to be our windows, anything. We want people to build back better, and people want to build back better. It's a dramatically accelerating trend. So we are going to double down on education, not education to sell our product, but education on affordability generally of high performance building. Last slide. I looked at the burn area many times, and it always looked to me like some animal, some horrible animal. And I found this image, and I thought it was appropriate in how it spread. But climate change is here. Our mission is clear. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Brad. Zach, Christine, I want to invite you back up. We only have a couple of minutes. and I'll open the floor in case anybody has a question they want to sneak in before we have to wrap this up and let you go. But what has been coming from the outside of this, from the nonprofit perspective, and the reason we paired these speakers today is because we are, and we've talked about this already in the conference, the cost of building to passive house or building to a higher standard, reducing our embodied and our operational carbon. When you look at that cost as a community, when you look at that cost as a country, when you look at that cost as a grid, when you look at that cost zoomed out, you can't afford not to do it. We know that. We've learned that. We've studied that. We know that it is part of the answer. And homeowners have to be part of that answer. We have to solve for their limited ability to buy in. And that's through education, and that's through incentives, and that's through people in this room who have an extraordinary amount of expertise and knowledge reaching out into their community to bring people up and help them into IECC 2021, even if that feels like a bygone era in the way you practice day to day. Help people into net zero, help people into terminology that, you know, I live a little bit in both worlds, a foot in passive house and a foot in meeting the requirements. And I hear both sides. And we are fortunate enough to be able to participate in those conversations. And Zach and Christine have done that, coming from the bottom and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to guide you. And here, Excel's here with a carrot, and the state's there, and the counties are there with a little bit of a stick, just saying, this way, please, this way, please. And Alpin's there from the front saying, we're already over here, just come join us. And so I think that bridge that is created by these speakers today is profound. And Marshall created a little bit of a pressure cooker of what we see happening over years and years in other communities. It happened all at once. The fire, it hasn't even been 2 years. And Kevin's house will be completed in 4 months, 5 months, fingers crossed. And Kevin, thanks for being here. We really appreciate you and all of the other homeowners who've been part of this. So we have time. I'm going to go over a little bit because they told me I could. That was their fault. If you have to step out, we understand. But I want to give the floor for at least 2 questions. We have about 5 minutes. So I'll let Robbie go ahead right here.
Thank you very much for all that you've done as a person connected with Louisville Fire for the last 20 years. I really appreciate that. What I'm curious about is I haven't heard anything said about electrification. So I'm curious what sort of adoption you've seen about that, why it hasn't been higher, and what we could do to encourage it. Thanks.
Zach, do you want to take this, or Christine?
No.
Here, I'll try. Hold high. Not fun.
I was just grabbing my notes here on so I can cite the current adoption rates. So we have 11% of our homes that are under permit that have chosen to register for Next Gen, Energy Star Next Gen certification. And that's our best measure of the rate of electrification. There's probably more. We have, despite all of the incentives that are out there, we have half of homeowners who are eligible for incentives have not registered for incentives yet. So we expect to see that the percentage increase. Obviously working in sustainability office, working in the climate change movement, I would like for that percentage to be higher. I think the conversation around electrification is like a layer deeper to the whole conversation around high performance building. It's like the next conversation to have. And a lot of the same resistance we saw to the codes, to the idea of high performance building, you go one layer deeper and you face that same resistance. And one of the things that we have done that I didn't mention in the presentation is that we know that for some reason, well, not for some reason, because of decades of advertising by the gas industry, many people are very attached to cooking with gas, right? Like the phrase cooking with gas is a marketing slogan, and there are jingles and there are old ads. Like the reason why we have that phrase is because some marketing executive paid by the gas industry came up with it. And And so we know that that's a barrier. And we heard, early on, we were at expos and for Marshall Fire homeowners and talking to them and say, hey, have you thought about going all electric? And yeah, I thought about it, but I just like cooking on my gas stove. And it's like, is it the benzene that you like? But it's, it's just so ingrained, it's part of our culture. And so we started a induction cooktop lending program where homeowners could try out or any Marshall, we did it initially for the Marshall Fire, and now it's open to any homeowner in Boulder County. They could try out induction cooking and see for themselves. And we see 50 percentage point increase of folks who are interested in going all electric after they have tried induction cooking. So there's much more to unpack there, but I know we're short on time, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Zach. We have time for one more question.
I have the mic.
Well, too late.
Sorry. Thanks for telling this story. It's really fantastic and really inspiring to hear about. I'm curious, just on the code enforcement side, what did you do to kind of ramp up and prepare people? Blower door testing, familiarity with passive house, and making sure that you had the code enforcement and code officials ready to kind of sign off on things as they came through.
Yeah, so just in general, all three, Boulder County has been through many disasters. This is some of definitely the most intense disaster, and particularly the most intense for Louisville and Superior. But Boulder County government has been through many before. And so we actually have a part of our building code that we wrote in called Article 19, where when a disaster happens, we activate that, and it makes parts of the rebuilding process from the code perspective faster and easier. All the communities also staffed up in code officials. So that's on the sort of the local government side. On the raiders and the builders side, Colorado Green Building Guilds, Robbie, and Excel Energy and the state have all been hosting, coming together and hosting trainings on, okay, here are, let's get down into the nitty gritty of, what Energy Star version 3.2 requires that's different from version 3.0. And as I said earlier, I think a lesson learned is that we should have started that training earlier, and we probably should be still doing more of it now, because we do see that disconnect between, a builder who just wants to get things done, and the HERS rater who may or may not be up to date on the current standard, and the homeowner who wants their home built in a certain way and wants to earn that incentive. So it's a challenge.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. We actually have a Marshall Fire event this Saturday because many, many people still haven't started the rebuilding process because of underinsurance or other issues. So it's like ongoing. Like we'll be there talking about rebates. Robbie will be there talking on the technical side, state resources, local resources. So again, this fire will hit our 2-year anniversary in January. So we're coming up on it, but it's ongoing, we'll just say, and we anticipate paying out those rebates probably for the next 5 years. So.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap it there. Feel free to come up and find us if you want to ask another question. I really appreciate all of your time, and thank you again to our presenters. You did a wonderful job. We appreciate you being here today.